here. How does consciousness arise out of matter? And I say this because this is the view that modern science takes, that somehow consciousness arises out of matter. It's a big mystery. It's called one of the hard problems of consciousness, one of the hard problems of neuroscience, and trying to figure out how consciousness comes out of matter. Well, I think the reason that that problem is one that has stymied scientists for a long time, and for which there seems to be no new insight inside, is because it's not matter that arises out of consciousness. It's not consciousness that is the product of matter. Rather, it's matter that generates consciousness. Or rather, put it another way, consciousness is the everything. It's everything there is. It's in my perspective on the nature of things. And by the way, I'm going to say before I get interrupted by the technical issues here, that what I say tonight is a lot of stuff about God. Now, why do I do that? God does not talk to me. I'm not a prophet or a preacher. But what I'm trying to present to you tonight is this: what a lot of years of thinking about these things. And I want to give you my best picture view of what I think is going on. But remember, it's what I think is going on. It's not some kind of divine revelation. It's simply my attempt to make sense out of the life on Earth, life as a human being, the existence of the universe, with some input from my astrophysics side, because I also have to consider whenever I say something that there are astrophysical sides to this, and at least that I am an expert in. But as for the God consciousness, I'm just trying my best to give you something that I think might be useful, because I found my insights kind of useful. And don't blame it on God. Let's have a thing called the God theory. These are sort of the elements that I propose as basic elements of the way things are, the reason and the structure of the world and the universe. I'm assuming there's a super consciousness that exists, which we might as well call God. It is the only thing that exists, the one and only thing. Next, the physical world is actually a virtual simulation. It has no real existence. It is a mathematical program running in God's mind. So what I'm proposing is that the physical world is not really the nuts and bolts made up of atoms and molecules and that sort of thing, particle-based view of reality. Rather, I think that is not actually real at all. It's a simulation along the lines of the thing we saw at the very outset of the talk tonight. We are offshoots of God. We are made of the very same consciousness, hence we are that. So in my perspective, God is everything there is. What he does to gain experience for himself is to live in the universe of his creation. And he does that how? Well, through you and me and all the living creatures on the planet and all the living creatures elsewhere in the universe. It's we that are basically doing God's experiencing for him, because how could some infinitely large thing, infinitely large being, immortal being, experience the things that we do in everyday life? And yet this everyday life of ours is a blessed thing. It's something that we can use to evolve ourselves by living properly. And I propose that probably God himself may be increasing his perfection, whatever that may mean, through the things that we experience here as him in the physical universe. Now, turning to the virtual reality, tremendous advances have been made in developing technology to make things seem completely and utterly real. For example, here is someone looking through an Oculus Rift VR system, and he says, "I'm testing the Oculus headset in a mountain climbing situation. The experience transports me to a jagged cliff in a virtual world so realistic that I can barely look down. Because when I do, my knees buckle and my palms sweat, and finally my brain has to interrupt, 'Dude, you're not really there.'" Well, the idea is to make you feel as real as there can be. It turns out the Army is not building a virtual Earth with enough realism in which soldiers and units can effectively train. The U.S. Army is creating a virtual space on the planet to drill troops. Now, you may or may not like this, but the point is it shows the power, the potential of virtual reality. And as with everything, it can be used for good or for evil. But I show this because it demonstrates the realism that's possible. And after all, we've only been doing this, 20 or 30 years. Imagine doing virtual reality 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now. I mean, it would be amazing the things that we'll be able to do, to replicate, so that you can't tell one from the other. And in fact, you basically do away with the need for a real physical universe. If God wants to experience reality, he doesn't have to make the universe. A virtual universe will do just fine. And that there are things that you can do, in fact, in the virtual realm, which you can't do in reality. For example, could you build a house made out of water? Now, I'm not talking about ice, I'm talking about liquid water. Could you build a house made out of water? Well, your nails would be liquid, your planks would be liquid, your screws would be liquid. How do you build something made out of that? You can't. And that's because the requirements for building a house and the requirements for being water are incompatible. Not even God can do that. But if we were saying we want a virtual simulation of this, no problem. I could write several lines of code and make myself a virtual liquid earth, virtual liquid house. It's very easy to write code to do that, but it's very difficult, in fact in this case impossible, to actually make the real thing. And so I'm proposing that even God might find the virtual reality approach to reality easier and more widely possible to do than if you really had to make universes. It's the creation of a simulated reality that touches all of our senses. I mean, here's someone who is reaching out and feeling whatever he thinks is projecting through his mind is part of the virtual reality. And right now, the sensibilities of these devices are not very fully developed yet. It's mainly visual. But in the future, they'll be tactile. They'll be hearing and smelling and other things that make things seem as real as it possibly can. Now, in his 1926 or his 2006 book, Programming the Universe, Seth Lloyd contends that the universe itself is one big quantum computer. Okay, fine and dandy. I'm with him so far. But the next thing that he says is something that is taking us down, I think, is really a very dark path. A quantum computer that is producing what we see around us and ourselves as it runs a cosmic program. You see the and ourselves in there. He is proposing that the universe is not just a virtual reality, which I think it is, but that we ourselves are virtual reality. And somehow we have managed to upload ourselves into a computer. That we are nothing but data in a hard drive. And that is our life. And that is our planet. And if someone in the future was the one doing this and they pulled the plug, we would be shut down. Now, this is to me about the darkest interpretation one can have of virtual reality being misused. And to do with the things that would create a world, as in here, a car being built, or whatnot. That's a very good outcome that would happen with application of virtual reality. But this other one, this really gives me the creeps. Nick Boston is a professor at Oxford University, and he wrote over the computer simulation some time ago, and it turned out to be a very influential paper. And lots of people have taken Boston seriously, and to see where that leads. Here's something that John Tierney, a contributor to the New York Times, wrote about Bostrom's book. He says, "Until I talked to Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford University, it never occurred to me that our universe might be somebody else's playground or hobby. I hadn't imagined that the omniscient, omnipotent creator of the heavens and earth could be an advanced form of a guy who spends his weekends building model railroads or overseeing video game worlds like The Sims." My apologies to Marcia for asking The Sims, but I didn't mean to imply anything here. But now it seems quite possible that, in fact, that if you accept a pretty reasonable assumption of Dr. Bostrom's, it is almost a mathematical certainty that we are living in someone else's computer simulation. And so here you have the ultimate reduction of human beings, spiritual beings, into something that is nothing but inanimate ones and zeros, inanimate data. I think this is very, very wrong. But I think the exploration of virtual reality in terms of creating the universe that we then live in and experience in, that is a very fruitful path to follow for trying to understand what the heck is going on, and what is creation all about? What might God be doing, and why? And I think that proposing that if we take the perspective of us as spiritual beings, who perhaps together with God create a virtual reality, that we then live in and experience, and which experience we then bring back to God, that, to me, seems like a pretty reasonable plan. I mean, that seems like something that a creator might want to do. I mean, if I was a creator, I'd want to do it. On the other hand, the brain in the jar version of reality, that is not good. Of course, the data would not be a vat of oil, it would be a hard drive. So, if you like the idea of being uploaded into the supercomputer, well, if you do, I would like to understand why, because it seems like a horrible misuse of something. So the idea that the universe is a simulation sounds like a plot out of the Matrix, which it is. But this was, after all, a topic at the 2016 Isaac Asimov debate at the American Museum of Natural History. And the moderator, Neil deGrasse Tyson, put the odds at 50-50 that our entire existence is a program on someone else's hard drive. Tyson is a distinguished astronomer and an educator. And in fact, you see him all over the TV these days. Sort of, I suppose, the successor to Carl Sagan. And he put the odds at 50-50 that our entire existence is a program on someone else's hard drive. Well, so did Ray Kurzweil. We have a sound device at home that was a Kurzweil device for writing music. But he's a brilliant guy who's written lots of things. And he has suggested that, quote, maybe our whole universe is a science experiment of some junior high school student in another universe. Well, there you have it. There are four possibilities that I see. Either you have the physical world is real and all there is. It's the only thing there is. This is pretty much the view of modern reductionist science. The world is real, we explore it greatly and try to understand it, but it's all there is. Or the physical world is real, but other realities exist. So this would be, say, an open-minded science perspective on reality, where other realities are thought to exist. Such as, for example, the theories you find in string theory, the worlds you find in string theory. In physics, now you have people writing about and talking about 10, 11, and more dimensional spaces that are necessary to derive the mathematics of some of the laws of physics that they're trying to explain. So, and even in mainstream physics, there's a need for other realities. And on the other hand, in the spiritual side of things, there are also other realities that exist. So the question is there any difference between an angel and an alien? They may both exist, but it may be a matter of semantics, what you call them. But at least from this point of view, you would have the physical world not being all there is. The physical world is a technologically based simulation, and so are we. So that's what we were just talking about. And this technologically based simulation is meant to include us, and I don't buy that. I hope you don't either. Or the physical world is a consciousness-based simulation. Consciousness-based simulation, not based on anything else but consciousness, but we are real. And that's where I'm putting my money. Nothing exists except the mind and its ideas. This was an idea put forth by Bishop George Berkeley already in the 18th century. Sir James Jeans was a brilliant mathematician of the last century. There are a number of things named after him, for example, Crater on the Moon and things like that. And he looked at the universe and also saw that in his way of thinking, and he's, by the way, one of the founders of quantum mechanics as well, looked at the universe and thought, well, this is not this inanimate thing that we take as our model. He said in his book, The Mysterious Universe, the universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a great machine. That is really that's how I see things as well. The universe is not a great machine, but it's a thought. In fact, not just one thought, but many thoughts. The thoughts of a creator thinking into existence through the sort of the analog protocols of mutual virtual reality to bring these into existence. And Eddington and Einstein, you'll recognize Einstein, of course, but the other gentleman there is Sir Arthur Eddington, again, one of the most brilliant British physicists of the last century. He was a Quaker, and he wrote a book, I'll show you a cover of it in a minute. He wrote a book on his belief in spiritual perspectives. And here he says, consciousness is not wholly, or even primarily, a device for receiving sense impressions. What he's saying there is that our consciousness is not here to just to pick up information about who we're being touched by, what is going, in our mouth, any physical thing that we do. It's more than just processing that consciousness is all about. There's something much deeper than that. Sure, it does that. I mean, what's the difference between you and listening to me tonight here and that film camera back there behind the Marsh is working? Well, I don't think that camera, it's seeing the same thing you are. It's looking at the same scene that you are. I don't think it's reflective of what I'm saying. But after all, we do that. We do that innately because we are conscious. And that consciousness is something that is basic. And it's kind of funny sometimes to hear people try to describe in neuroscientific terms, how the correlations of things actually explains consciousness. If you have a correlation between some stimulation, some part of your brain that's being stimulated, and a memory or some other thing, it's thought that somehow is almost on the verge of explaining consciousness. But I think it's not. I mean, I think these correlations they're well able to study for medical reasons. I don't think they'll ever explain consciousness because I don't think it can be explained. It's fundamental. And how do you explain something that is the root basis of everything? It's something that you have to begin with as a first cut at understanding something, and then you understand more complex things based on top of that. But to explain consciousness as something arising out of matter, or as something that is secondary, is just difficult for me to imagine. Imagine, for example, you try to explain color to someone who's totally blind. And how would you explain the color red to someone who's blind? You can't do it. You can use all sorts of fancy descriptions, adjectives. It's a hot thing, it's a cold thing, it's a warm, it's a fuzzy thing. Whatever you say, that would make some sense to someone who already sees the color, but none of those things would generate a color. You cannot generate a color. And so you can't possibly describe a color in more basic terms than what it is. Well, the two books I mentioned, on the left is The Science and the Unseen World. This was the book that Sir Arthur Eddington published in the 1920s, based on his perspective as a Quaker and a scientist. A very good book. And then on the right, I just want to show you that Eddington also was bright enough to write the first textbook on general relativity. In fact, Eddington made Einstein famous. Einstein predicted that space-time could be explained, rather than gravity could be explained as a curvature of space-time. Something very esoteric that most scientists couldn't even understand. Well, Eddington was the one who proved that was correct by heading out an eclipse expedition in 1919 to photograph a total eclipse of the sun and showed the bending of starlight around the sun. And that successful experiment was then publicized, hit the New York Times, and overnight Einstein became a superstar back in 1919, and pretty much remained so all his life. The mathematical theory of relativity on the right shows his brilliance. I mean, I'm sure none of you have seen that book, but I have. I studied that book when I was in graduate school. It was full of page after page of tensor calculus. Tensor calculus. I mean, once upon a time I knew what that was. But anyway, it was a brilliant book. Evidence of God. I'm going to say that the Big Bang itself is sort of evidence. That's not quite fair because, after all, we understand the Big Bang and astrophysics as well. But it's interesting to note that prior to Einstein's general relativity, the universe was thought to be infinite by astronomers. And just assumed the universe is infinitely large. And it turns out that it was as a dynamically beginning event. Genesis was better at that because it had an explosion. Now, I don't buy anything in Genesis, really, except for the fact that it did happen to have an explosion at the beginning of the universe, and astronomers didn't have that back in 1919. So I give religion a slight edge for that point of view back then. But there are really much more extensive proofs of God, or at least evidence for God, some being the just right values of laws and constants of nature. And what I mean by that is that the laws of nature are such that planets, that galaxies can be formed after the Big Bang. Stars constitute galaxies, and surfaces of stars or planets have their surfaces of stars, or surfaces of planets, or where life can evolve. And so you have a number of values of constants, such as, for example, the strength of the gravitational field, or such as the ratio of the electromagnetic to the gravitational force. And there are a bunch of these. They turn out to be just right to let things happen on the surface of this planet that are conducive to life, that are conducive to evolution. By the way, I'm a firm supporter of evolution, so I want that to be made clear. And I call this the Goldilocks principle, because after all, if you want a universe that's not too hot and not too cold, but just right, you need something like the Earth. And interestingly now, the Kepler Observatory, launched by NASA 4 or 5 years ago, has now detected several candidate stars that show by the study of, well, you study by the transit of planets in front of the surface of the star. You can derive from that the existence of planets and the orbits of planets. And they found a number of Goldilocks principle just right planets, seemingly, that might be candidates for life. Planets that are close enough to their star that they are warm but not too warm, and they're not cold, not too cold. Some of these stars turn out to be small red dwarfs, by the way. But still, there are now some stars that are pretty good candidates for life. And even the moon, a moon of Proxima Centauri. Now, I didn't even know Proxima Centauri had a moon until recently. And I published papers on Proxima Centauri in terms of flares that I discovered there through orbiting NASA satellites, but I didn't know it had a moon. But anyway, they've now detected the signatures of that we just write for formation of life there. And interestingly, that's of course the nearest planet to us, 4.3 light years away. So you hope to visit that someday. Near-death experiences. I have read so many near-death experiences, and they become so convincing after a while that you really have to become kind of a fanatic to try to rule them all out in terms of something else. Like saying, well, the brain is subject to oxygen deprivation. Yeah, sure, these things happen, but the things that people report in near-death experiences go far beyond that. Far beyond that. And there are thousands of these now. And just ignore these, I think, is wrong. It's not scientific. It's not scientific. And lastly, a simulated universe. Why do I put that in evidence of God? Well, I guess it's because if you want to propose something new, it's good if you have a model for it. If you can find something, discover something new, and at the same time go, well, but I think here's how it works. That's a lot better than just saying, well, I discovered something, I have no idea how it works. I think the simulated universe is something that works, that demonstrates how a universe can be made. You don't have to make it, you just envision it. Now, why would God envision the universe? How would God do that? Well, I'll show you in some later slides that really, to some extent, God is a mathematician. And you ask yourself, what is God? Or you answer, as I did when I was in grade school talking to my Catholic nuns, what is God? And they, of course, God, I think some of the catechism answers, I suppose, but I lost my train of thought. Anyway, the laws of nature are just right for the formation of life, probably in many places in the universe. We know there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And there are another 100 billion galaxies like the Milky Way, but there are galaxies, some of which are like the Milky Way. Plenty of places for life to exist. Further evidence of God. I bet you didn't know that the astronomer who first proposed the expansion of the universe was a Catholic priest. It was Monsignor George Lemaitre, a Belgian Catholic priest, astronomer, and he just prior to Hubble's observations of the expansion of the universe, he predicted that the universe should be expanding. In fact, Einstein made a flaw there, because Einstein assumed in this simulation in this mathematical representation of the universe, assumed that it was a stationary situation. He had to figure out how to keep it from collapsing. And the way to do that was to introduce an arbitrary constant called the cosmological constant. And they introduced that, and that kept the universe from moving, from expanding or collapsing. Well, after having done that, he discovered that, well, it's expanding after all. I should have taken that into account. So here he is discussing this with Monsignor George Lemaitre. What made the Big Bang occur in the first place? Well, if you ask a scientist, one of my colleagues, they would say, well, probably a quantum fluctuation of some sort, occurred for no reason at all. When I say for no reason, because it's hard to have a reason if you don't have any time. How can something happen if you don't have time? I mean, if time doesn't exist, then everything would be stopped. Nothing further could happen without any time. So you need time. But yet, if you look at the religious traditions, you find that many of them talk about God being in a timeless realm, which I think is probably correct. But if you have nothing whatsoever, how can you have a quantum fluctuation? I don't think that's anything but a word, really. It's not a concept. You might as well have a God. One quantum fluctuation. I mean, they're both things that we know are zero about at this point in time. Zero about what these things did prior to there being the existence of a universe of space and time. And I spend a lot of time thinking about time, actually, because it's such an indispensable thing. Without it, everything comes to a halt. Nothing ever originates. Nothing ever stops. Well, everything stops. It just comes to a grinding halt, and nothing further can happen. And yet, I think that our understanding of time is faulty. It's got to be something different than that. No, my bones, it's got to be different than that. I mentioned the just right values, the Goldilocks and the three bears, but the just right conditions also exist for things that are more critical. For example, we need carbon and oxygen. Carbon and oxygen are the basis of our life. That's organic chemistry is based on carbon and oxygen. That's what we primarily are made of, is carbon and oxygen. But as it turns out, the elements that we know on the Earth come from supernova explosions. When a star explodes, it spews this stuff out into space, and eventually some of the stuff congeals again into a star or planet. That's where the elements came from. But you can prove that as the development of a supernova goes along, that the temperatures become just right to convert hydrogen to helium, hydrogen, helium, neon, hydrogen, helium, lithium, helium, boron, carbon, and so on. But you need to stop at carbon and oxygen. You can't just go over them. And it turns out you would if there weren't a special resonance somewhere in the beryllium atom, I believe, that makes it more likely for carbon and oxygen to be than not to be. It's just one of these crazy things that in the physics of these two elements, there is a constraint that allows the chaining up of the creation of elements not to skip carbon and oxygen, because they're really critical. And in fact, they're so critical that a 1% change in one of these resonances that Fred Hoyle postulated, this is about a 1% change will keep the process from generating enough carbon or oxygen to make the many, many planets and stars we see in the universe. So that's pretty good evidence that there being some kind of creative creator behind it all. And as I mentioned, the ratio of gravitational to electric force. Okay, how about the unusual properties of water? Good old water, it's everywhere, but it's very special because water and the carbon and oxygen, boy, those are the bases of life. Well, the boiling point of water is unusually high for a liquid. In fact, it remains a liquid and so long that it's there to be used in a critical range for biology to take place. If water turned into a vapor too quickly, then you wouldn't have it be available for generating the biology necessary to further evolution, and that would not be good. Water, and the other property is that water is less dense than ice. So water is less dense when frozen than when not frozen. You can see that in the icebergs there. Ice floats on water, water stays below. Now, if this were different, if this were the other way around, you'd have ice flowing to the bottom of the ocean, and probably causing the oceans to freeze up from the bottom up. So you really need to have a special property of water that it's lighter than ice. It also has some applications for your drinks. If you have a nice dry martini or something like that, you want the water to flow to the top. Rather than we'll skip that. Evidence of God. Near-death experiences, I mentioned that. And it's not just the coming back to life, it's the unitary experience of the mystical nature that is the mystery about near-death experiences. And my co-author, by the way, knows all about this near-death experience business. Tommy Tompkins wrote a book about neurosurgeon Eben Alexander and his near-death experience. Now, some of you may have read this book because it came out as a bestseller about 4 or 5 years ago. Eben Alexander was a neurosurgeon, and one morning he woke up and had a terrible illness. Didn't know what it was. It turned out to be coli bacterial meningitis. Sounds pretty bad to me. And he was unconscious in a coma for 5 or 6 days, and they thought he was dead. We're about to give up on him. Well, he came back to life and reported, "Oh my God, you won't believe what I saw." Amazing things on the other side. And he was someone who did not go into this with a belief in anything religious. And he was sort of a hard-nosed neurosurgeon, but he sure hadn't, what happened experience. And my co-author, Tommy Tompkins, was responsible for that book, and that brought us together. And past life experiences of children, researched by Professor Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia. Stevenson he's a great guy. Marsh and I knew him well for many years. And he took only the very best cases of reincarnation in India and Ceylon and investigated them. In some cases found some remarkable correlations between the physical appearance of something on a child's body and the wound on someone who had been killed. Oftentimes he managed to find relatives of a child, relatives who remembered, when the child died, whatever, kind of fever or whatever, and now it's coming back again. And Ian Stevenson says, here he is. Can he identify the members of his family? He does. I've seen a child, or read about a child who came back and recognized his mother. So it's quite a remarkable set of investigations that he published for the last my years going back to the 1960s, I guess. And he was a really bright guy. He was a full professor of psychiatry, an MD at the University of Virginia, so not a flake. I just raised the question of how do you make a real universe? Well, as I said, I think it's easier to make a virtual one than a real one. And in fact, not just easier, but also maybe more fruitful because you can do things that you can't do. You know, like build the house of water. You just can't build a house of water, it just doesn't work unless you do it as a program, then you have a few lines of code, I'll take care of it. And just as a supercomputer of the future can create amazing simulated realities, so can God do the same thing with his thoughts. So what I'm proposing is that we take the mathematics of virtual reality, take the mathematics of it, and say, well, how is this executed? How are all these actions that you see in the avatar executed? Well, there's computer code that generates all this stuff. And the processing of that computer code is what makes the game tick. So, how would God do such a thing? Why would God do such a crazy thing? Well, because you don't really have to have a computer, electronic computer, to execute your algorithm. You could if you want to sit there and just write it, right? You take an algorithm and read it, one after the other, after the other, after the other. A million pages, of processing, because you're reading the instructions instead of running them on a computer. Well, I imagine God is such a great being that he could just as well read with a snap. And so it's not that God, needs any kind of electronic computer. He's got the brain power as sort of the ultimate mathematician, the ultimate logician to do such things. I think the logic, if I may put it out so bluntly, logic and mathematics and love seem to be the three of the sort of attributes of God that I keep running across. Kind of funny because we're not supposed to have any attributes. God is not supposed to have any attributes. But it seems to me, from what I keep reading over and over, is that God is a mathematician, is a genius of the symbolic world, and love constitute the powers at his disposal to make reality real. The ancient Vedantic, by the way, this is my third point on here. The ancient Vedantic viewpoint is that life is an illusion. And I say, here's how it's done. And I think I've been discussing with you, at least in my humble opinion, here's how it's done. And I think it's kind of interesting here how it's done. I don't recall seeing anyone who said so explicitly, well, God's creative abilities consist of using his mathematical superpowers to, via logic and mathematics, create worlds which then serve the purpose of being his playground, being his school. I don't think I've seen it quite that represented anywhere else, and I think it's a damn good idea, which is why we're talking about it. And you can debate this afterwards with me and tell me why it's not. So consciousness is the one and only reality, and hence it can never be explained as fundamental. It eliminates the need for a consciousness to emerge from a physical world via some kind of mechanism. And the physical reality we perceive is an illusion in a specific scientific sense. The uploaded brain simulation hypothesis, on the other hand, argues that our current universe is merely a computer-based simulation being run by more sophisticated intelligences, or maybe not so sophisticated. Maybe there are the high school kids running their class project for the year, and creating human beings and human societies to study. But I don't buy it. And then the other aspect of this hypothesis is that we ourselves are no more than artificial consciousness in such a vast system, essentially deluding ourselves that we are real until the plug is pulled. It's bad enough to believe that your existence will end someday, but in the simulation hypothesis, you never had that real existence in the first place. So I'm proposing that we and all living things are offshoots of a transcendent consciousness or cosmic mind. The reality we take to be made of physical stuff is actually a virtual reality created by this transcendent consciousness, precisely so that you may yield experience. And just a few more sort of statements that talk about God being the ultimate mathematician. Sir James Jeans said, as I said before, the universe appears to have been designed by a pure mathematician. And Einstein wrote, how is it possible that mathematics, a product of human thought, that is independent of experience, fits so excellently that the objects of physical reality. In other words, how do these elaborate mathematical themes we discover sometimes, how do they wind up corresponding to the real universe? Give me an example. Einstein's general theory of relativity is based on the idea that space-time is curved. Well, where did that idea come from? It turns out that the idea of a curved universe, a curved space, this is a mathematical thing, not a physical thing, was developed by Bernhard Riemann, a German mathematician of the early 19th century. Now, did anybody at the time know what to do with curved geometry, four-dimensional curved geometry? No idea what to do with that. Seems like a pretty useless discovery. And yet that was exactly the thing that Einstein needed to scientifically develop his general theory of relativity. So there's a good example of something that just came along and turned out to be absolutely essential to the development of science. So there's a close harmony oftentimes between science and mathematics. Eugene Wigner, the enormous usefulness of mathematics and the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious, and that there is no rational explanation for it. So why is mathematics so able to be brought to service to unexplain the world? Probably because it was in the brain, the mind of God, the mathematics of God was involved in the making of it through the virtual reality concept. And here I try to show that you don't need a computer to calculate. The kids over there are doing it, and the lady looking out at the blackboard, she's probably doing it. You don't need to have a computer. You can do it all in your head if you want to. It gets to be pretty tedious, I suppose, but if you've got a head like God's, then I suppose it wouldn't be so tedious. This is a book by my colleague of mine, Marin. He's an astrophysicist at the Space Telescope Science Institute, and he wrote this book called God and Mathematician. He writes, I was simply presenting a mystery with which some of the most original minds have struggled for centuries, the apparent omnipresent and omnipotent powers of mathematics. These are the type of characteristics one normally associates only with a deity. And in fact, there is this thought that there's a realm of Platonic forms, same as after Plato, that there is a real existence, a real dimension in which things like the numbers, the characters of nature, the logical facts, all the abstract mathematical stuff resides in a real, accessible dimension called a Platonic world of forms. Yeah. So we can take the explanation of the universe involving these three things: as an inanimate digital supercomputer scaled up by 10 to the nth power, or n is a huge number, or consciousness choosing to act like a computer. There are those two ways of doing things. I would propose that God would probably be the former because I don't think he actually creates any computers. The operation would be via highly structured thoughts, and our existence and environment is an illusion created by the operation of the supercomputer. Our existence is 100% real, but as offspring of a superconsciousness, that's what we are. Our environment is a simulation. And so to go back to the beginning of the talk, we take consciousness as the primary, but not as the sole constituent of our universe and other possible universes. We posit the existence of a vast transcendent consciousness or cosmic mind, which you can call God if you want to. Our true nature is beings of consciousness. This is the key thing. Our nature is being of consciousness. By the way, it explains a lot of things. We view ourselves as being little bits of God incorporated into a life that we live on this planet Earth. It takes away some of the arguments that life is unfair. How is it fair to have an infant born and maybe live 10 days and die of something the kids at age 10 days die of, boom, straight to heaven. Whereas some other person might wind up in some awful situation where things are just going bad, and all his peers and his parents and his whole environment is bad, and he dies and poof, goes to hell. It's not fair, and I don't think you can actually have a fair kind of system like that with just one life. This is too short. I mean, the universe exists for 13.7 billion years now. And so we should have a life on Earth of 60, 70, 80, 90 years. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. So what does make sense is for us to take our attributes from a given life, bring them back to the consciousness that generated us, and then come back again, hopefully enriched by what we've done, perhaps impoverished by what we've done if we've lived a particularly bad life, and then go again through this round of lives, of existence. To me, that makes total sense. It's not kind of a Western majority view yet, but I suspect it will be. Here's an example of the hologram aboard the Starship Enterprise. It was taken in the year 2365 and smuggled back to us in time by a time traveler. And here you have Commander, what's his name?
Riker.
Commander Riker and the Deanna, right. And they're just stepping out of a hologram, out of the holodeck, having an enjoyable picnic, and there they are. And that's what you have on your Star Cruisers. And here he is, Commander Riker, walking into an alien forest, again, courtesy of the virtual reality. So, just to summarize these, how long are we supposed to talk tonight? Until
There's plenty of time.
yeah. I'm just wondering if I should go off into, there's other related topics here, but I don't want to go into something that's going to take us in that deeply into something.
I think we have time. It's only a little after 8.
All right.
So we want to end by 9:45, including our 8:45.
Let's go for a while then. Okay. Maybe I should, I don't know, at this point. Give me a break. Let me take the questions, because what I'm going to say next would be along these lines, but somewhat different. So let me see if there are any questions in the middle of the talk. Yes?
Oh, we're going to use a microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, Bernie, I think it's okay to take questions if you're getting tired.
Yeah.
Yeah, you seem like you're getting a little tired. No? You tell us.
Okay.
But could you leave this up on the screen?
Yeah. Okay.
When you presented the combination of what you felt was transcendent consciousness versus the simulation more mechanically based, I wondered if you have any insights around the ethical and moral use of creating simulations. And I'm reminded of the movie by Wim Wenders called Until the End of the World. Not many people have seen it. It's really hard to get now. And it basically demonstrates everyone is walking around with a virtual reality eye screens and not interacting with each other. So if you could address the ethical implications of the difference. Thank you.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the religious perspective is one that wants people to care for each other, have compassion for each other, bring things together rather than tear us apart. And if we each had our own private universe that we escape to all the time, cut ourselves off from other human beings, that would go contrary to this overall mandate to try to bring more love into the world, more respect for each other, and care for each other. So there's that aspect of morality I would certainly say would be negatively impacted if we all spend our time grooving on the virtual reality. I think that's fair enough.
A little unclear from your hypothesis where the principle of benevolence fits in here, because in some of the realities of simulation, it could very well be that we're a hobby of somebody's who's there. But from a spiritual perspective, the deeper you go into spirituality, the more you encounter love as one of the principal aspects of spirit. It's not an indifference. There's no indifference as you go higher up in the spiritual hierarchy of angels and guides and so on. They all care about human beings. And so where is the evidence of the benevolence of God in your theory?
Well, I guess I would say I haven't put that into the theory. I think it belongs there. and I'm not claiming that my theory here doesn't look up the same thing. I mean, I'm giving you some of my best thoughts on what this might all be about in our relationship to God and so on. But I mean, there are many aspects of what the world should be like. There are many, which you pointed out as very important ones. Benevolence and compassion are good things, and they were fit in here, but I just haven't, it was beyond the scope of the job.
What doesn't that, if God is benevolent, God is love, doesn't that rule out some of the other more frivolous theories of reality as simulation?
Well, what I think is that, I think we're very important for God all the time. There's the view that if you could make a perfect duplicate of somebody, say a perfect duplicate of you, now every atom and every molecule in the right place, and somehow that would be you. And that's sort of almost taken for granted in science that that's the case. When you teleport something from one space to another, as they do in the Enterprise all the time, you know, you're actually disassembling and reassembling a being. You assume that being is then that being that was there on the other end of the transportation device. But I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, this is in a sense, this is an amoral. This would be an amoral physical condition, because there is a theory called the many worlds hypothesis, in which you have possible outcomes of experiments. And the question in quantum mechanics always is, well, which one of these outcomes is going to happen? And one of them does and the others don't. In ordinary quantum mechanics, that's called collapse of the wave function, also called, by the way, decoherence. I'm getting too deep for my own good here. But I don't believe you are that. You would be that entity. If you were a perfect duplicate, what you would be is either a zombie or a cadaver. And I think that you cannot take the spirit within somebody and move it someplace else. So reconstruct the physical body and say that's it. That's all there is to it. And this is one of the things that actually it gets my dander up when I think about the many worlds hypothesis, because it's so far-fetched. How many times in a second would some kind of question appear in your mind that requires a judgment, an answer? How many times is the choice made? Well, when I talk about choice, I don't just mean a choice whether to go get an ice cream that's chocolate or vanilla. I mean all of the choices in my body. I mean, how many the atoms interact all the time in my body, and there are 10 to the, whatever, 25th choices being made by all the little particles in my body. And the many worlds theory says, well, each one of those comes from its own universe. If you have that many choices to be made, you get 10 to the 25th new universes arising. What? You know, and this happens to not just your body, but everybody's. You get 10 to the billion power after the first 2 or 3 seconds of this thing going on, this happening. And yet, some of my colleagues take this as being a real possible explanation of the quantum phenomenon of decoherence. And it's striking as crazy and act as immoral, because if you're here as a good guy, and there are trillions of duplicates of you out there, somebody that's going to be a bad guy, and you know you're a serial killer over here, but you're a model father over there. Where's the morality of this? Why don't you just live the worst life that you want, to get what you want, because somebody else is going to pay the price for it by being the bad guy in that universe. It gets to be both mathematically ridiculous and logically pretty absurd. Now I think we're talking about another corner here, so let's move on back out and ask them any other questions.
Yeah. Do you believe that God resides inside all of us, and then we all create reality, co-create reality with God?
Yes, I do, yes. And if he lives inside, I don't know that the spirit is not mechanical, it's not material. So the spirit resides in some way associated with our body. I wouldn't want to say exactly how, because I don't know. But it's connected, as you would say, or as you said. Yes.
I just wanted to kind of contribute to his question and integrate some of your ideas. I come from the tradition of Gnostic background. I actually got the inroads into being interested in physics, but in the ancient Gnostic tradition, they proposed something very similar, as you pointed out, all the different ancient traditions. But they had an idea that the subtle nature of consciousness, the logos, and they called it the first thought, the first self-aware thought, which bifurcates the wave function and manifest things. When you take a measurement, you bifurcated the wave function and that creates reality. So they call the masculine principle the logos or first thought, and Sophia was the heart, the wisdom, and the love. So in their story, just their way of interpreting it, there is the means of virtual reality that you proposed, but then another creation had actually interfered, thinking it was the creator, thinking that it, just like we do with our virtual reality or our creation of artificial intelligence, that we think, oh, we're the grand creator. And it's interesting in the story of Genesis, I couldn't understand why from the traditional point of view, they would say, oh, you can eat of the tree of knowledge. Oh no, they've achieved morality, consciousness of good and bad. We can't let them eat from the second tree or they'll live forever and become like us. Well, the Gnostics proposed that idea was these other people who had thought we were just their simulation and they were the ultimate creator. But Sophia, love, that greater wisdom of God, knows that every being or creation that possesses that subtle nature of consciousness has a direct connection to source. And that source, that ultimate source of the Logos and Sophia, regardless of these nested layers, say if we created an artificial reality and it obtained consciousness and we allowed this program to run, it would recognize its consciousness is directly sourced by the creator and would bypass any of the immorality of maybe less self-aware creations. So they saw it all as a process of us becoming aware, regardless of any intermediary layers, that we have the spark of Sophia within all of us, which is love. And the reason why there's inherent morality in that is because the all that is knows that we are all one and cannot help but love itself. And so to me, that sort of Gnostic perspective, even though it can seem a little dark in the middle, is saying how even if we were somehow, hypothetically, a science project of some other layer below the great creator, the Gnostic said, it is impossible for consciousness not to rise above that and connect and realize itself, because consciousness itself is all that is. And so we're ultimately free, and I just feel like that's where love comes in, and I feel like that's what's happening right now, is that we're all becoming aware of it.
At the top, I think there's a book called Gnosis, and it talks about the demiurge.
Yes, exactly.
To me, the demiurge seemed to be just a deluded being who thought he was a god, who was not God. And that doesn't strike me as something very pleasant. So where did the demiurge come from? What brought it about?
Maybe kind of like us noodling around and thinking that these create, but anything, it's really, it's only an illusion that we've got.
Okay, well, there, can we get there? Go ahead.
Thanks. Getting back to the Big Bang that you mentioned earlier, as sort of the creator or God started this whole process of the Big Bang. What are your thoughts on that in terms of why that was done? Do you think that was a conscious act? Or maybe it was an accidental act and then something was made out of an accident, more of an accidental act? I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Because that's that moment sort of that goes into why that all happened.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think it was definitely a deliberate act because it resulted in this universe, which is so perfect, I guess, for providing the experience that you want God to seek. I would think God would want to seek. So, based on the outcome here, I would say that it would have to be a deliberate action. Now, if you read things in Kabbalah, the discussion about God not having any desire, it's wrong to say that God has a desire and has a will. And on the other hand, there's something that arises in him which causes him to create the universe too. In this case, they evacuate a region of sort of pseudo hyperspace and let light flow in, and that influx of light then generates presumably the Big Bang. Something like that is the story I found in Kabbalah. But it sure seems like it. I don't know the answer to your question, obviously, but I would regard it as being pretty sure that it was for a reason.
Thank you.
No? I don't have a question as much as I would like to share something.
Sure.
So some of you know that I'm one of those people who had the experience of dying and was resuscitated. And The top of my head is a graph, believe it or not. So, so when I went, my experience was at one of the levels. I went through different levels and had different experiences in different levels. When I got to the ultimate level, there was no time or space. So the universe was inside me. There was no body. There was no personality. So it's, I talk about this at Unity in Marin. So if you're interested, let me know afterwards. But all those things that you mentioned, the world was, I knew everything, or I could know everything, and it was mathematical. I am the least mathematical person in the world in this body. My brother's a mathematician, but I'm not, you know. But everything was mathematical equations somehow. What else did you address?
Well, I think it's wonderful. I mean, how you validate your personal experience, something I put in here for theoretical reasons.
Right, and from my personal experience also, so pure consciousness, when I was at the ultimate place, that was pure consciousness, but pure consciousness was not a void. It was not empty. It wasn't black.
Yeah.
It was underneath that level of black. It was white, dynamic, moving, ready to create. It was potential. It was a field of all possibilities.
I'm going to put you on the spot. The question that
Can I just finish the sentence?
Go ahead.
I just want to finish the sentence. So, when I somehow, after an infinity, there was some little bit of duality. I somehow pulled myself out of that, and there was some little bit of duality, and where there was that and me, some volition. From that level, I could create. Not from the other level, from that level I could create. And I did a lot of studying about this afterwards. I was a total atheist, materialist, you know, left brain, super intellectual type, you know what I'm talking about, who didn't believe in this stuff. And afterwards, I went on a search. I just read everything I could and so on. And what I found out is that in Sanskrit, that level, the very, very, where that place, very tiny bit of duality, that's where you become a co-creator. For that level, I could manifest, I could zoom in to anything and I could create what I wanted. So it's a different level. Anyway, what did you want?
Well, I have questions here. And I know you're not going to be able to answer this because I think nobody knows the answer, but it said again the nature of time. You said it was timeless.
Yeah.
How can that be? Because when this thing of timeless and boom, everything stops. In fact, you
Yes.
not only have full stop,
So-
you never have full start. You can't start. How does this happen?
So, I can only tell you my experience. I can't. So you're asking for an intellectual answer, but it's not intellectual. But the experience was that I was in the beginning of time, and I was in the end of time, and I was in every other. There was no. I could see the future and I could see the past. I could zoom in to any of that, but it was all happening at once.
Yeah.
It's very, so how can I say that?
I'm sure you can't explain it.
But the experience was there, and in the only thing that comes close to it that I can experience while I'm in this body is in meditation. I started meditating afterwards. In meditation, going into the transcendent. And there I have the same experience, where it's pure consciousness. So.
Thank you, Ellen.
Question back here.
One more question.
Okay.
Thank you. Your hypothesis that all of reality, physical reality, is actually a simulation, but we can understand it mathematically, at least in that sense. It seems to me mathematics is actually a form of thought. And if you have a thought, you have a thinker. So there's a God that's behind everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yet at the basis of quantum physics, everything is so strange to human experience and logic, defying human experience and logic. I think that is support for the idea that what we experience is indeed a simulation.
Right. Only experience, but not ourselves. Ourselves are immortal beings. But when we experience interactions with the virtual world that's been created. But perhaps without co-creation. I like that idea of there being a co-creation of God. That's God making this, but God together with those parts of Himself that are going to reside therein, they also have a say in it, and together create a world that's congenial, to that.
Thank you.
Just wanted to say that,
Talking to them.
okay, I just wanted to say that that material I gave you, Harvey Young used to say that the universe came into existence because of purpose. If there was no purpose, there would have been no purpose to make the universe. So a purposeless universe to him, that the scientists were saying we're all an accident, to him didn't make sense. And then just to lighten it up a little bit, Swami Vivekananda, who I'm sure some people have heard, used to say that the reason we get in trouble with organized religion is organized religion is crowd control. But like you said, when you're actually appealing to spirituality with divinity, it's direct contact with the divine. So,
I have a question that's not shared this time, but I wanted to ask you. Yeah, not shared this time, but what I was reading a book on the nature of time, and it was talking about how just according to the theory of just basic relativity, that if one were a consciousness that was a photon, for example, that since it's traveling at the speed of light, it would not experience time.
Exactly.
So from the point, I'm still, I can kind of throw words like, Jesus, oh, the Alpha, Omega, it's all happening now, like she said.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wondered if you could elaborate on that phenomenon, basically that when a photon is emitted, even if it happened at the quote-unquote beginning of time, and wasn't absorbed until at the end of time, if you were that photon, a conscious particle, there would be no time elapsed.
That's exactly right. If you take the special theory of relativity, and you see what happens at the speed of light, which is the speed of light travels, that's where that makes sense. There will be infinite time dilation, which means the time just comes to a standstill, and infinite space contraction. And so the beginning of the universe, or in your case, the beginning of the universe, when this photon is emitted, and where it winds up, that space disappears too. So there's no time, no space, and this is not a conjecture. This is the simple applications of the first laws of special theory of relativity of Einstein. So there's no arguing that. But here's something that is even a deeper consequence of it. So if the photon is emitted here and winds up going there so it's absorbed, that's fine. But it has to sort of surrender itself before it goes into infinity. But what if there's nothing there to absorb it? Can a photon be emitted if it doesn't have a place to get absorbed? So you take the Andromeda galaxy, 3 million light years away. So the photon is emitted by some star in the Andromeda galaxy, and they're whizzing along for 3 million years, and finally it's measured by me and my telescope. That's my interpretation of it. Traveled 3 million years again. Its interpretation was, well, it jumped like that from where it was to here because space and time are all dilated. So I asked the question, well, suppose a photon has no place to go. Can it leave without having a destination waiting for it? I guess not. What are the further implications of that? I don't know. But you can lie awake at night and think about that for a long time.
I'm wondering how light might be a candidate, even though it's technically, I guess it's matter, how it might be a candidate as a substrate for consciousness. consciousness, or do you feel that it's deeper than that, and the photons sort of merge out of this underlying?
It takes me to some of the deeper waters because there's a thing called the zero-point field, which I've worked in for a number of years. It's funded by NASA. And it's been, a lot of it has been taken over by amateurs who have various weird ideas. Some are interesting, some are just crazy. And it's given the whole field kind of a bad reputation because people are bandying this term about without knowing what the heck they're talking about. And it made it difficult for me because I had a grant from NASA to work on this, and getting that grant took some doing. So, yes, and people have quoted me as saying, just recently I saw a quote of me saying that the zero-point field is consciousness. I never said that, but I saw it in print the other day. So, but if I take my science hat, off and put on my more spiritual hat, yeah, there might be something about the idea that the zero-point field is the dynamic underlying energy source of the whole universe. And it's so enormous that you can use it to do anything you want to do, and you never diminish it by a bit because it's so enormous. And it seems you can argue that the equations of physics are consistent with that. And yet, there also, this raises other problems that make it difficult for scientists to say, well, we can take such a weird thing, such a super energetic thing, and make it the subject of our research because it's just too crazy.
Right. And there's nuances with science.
There are nuances of the nuances, yeah. And in politics, nuances in politics. Any other questions? Yeah.
One quick thing, she stole exactly what I was going to say, but in a completely different way, which was, and I would say, has anybody ever asked the guys who said we're a reality created by a kid in a science lab? Has anybody gone up to one of these people and said, well, where are they? What's their reality? Mm-hmm. If we're their reality, then what's their reality?
Well, their reality would be just the kids in the far future.
But still, what is the nature of that? That's.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, I guess who's the real?
So
who's on first?
But then, my question would be about talking. You know, in firsthand, dealing with scientists and in the world of science, and I'm just wondering. The world. It seems as though the world of science's perception of all of this is that it's complete hooey.
I think, though, that this sort of thinking about virtual reality has got a future. I mean, I think it's come along now, and it's going to be so driven by the technology of gaming and so on that it's going to be such a rich and powerful thing. It can make a lot of money for people. I think there's an up-and-coming field, and I kind of hate to see it going in the direction that you just said. I've talked about here, our own reality being perceived as nothing but data. And the answer to your question is, oh, is it the kid that did this? Well, that kid may have been a simulation of somebody else's thing 1,000 years from now. And that guy was simulation 100,000 years from now. Where does it end? Sort of like the old Egyptian idea of, the earth, what is the earth standing on? What's standing on the turtle's back? Well, what's that standing on? Well, no, turtle. There's turtles all the way.
Well, when I was a kid, and I never understood this until the last 10 years, but when I was a kid, really young, I always had this idea that we were the dream of a whale. I thought all of existence is a dream of a whale, and I didn't know what that meant in my little young mind. But now I realize.
Okay, I have a comment, which you may or may not want to comment on, but my favorite thing that you presented tonight was toward the end when you said the universe doesn't have to be real. The universe can be a simulation, but we are real. And to me, that beautifully addresses what I believe, which is that the entire material world is illusory, you might say, and what is real is that inner space or consciousness, which I do know that I exist because of that, because of consciousness. So I know that I'm real.
I fully agree with that, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I want to go on that because it takes care of that topic, and there's more in there about But I guess with quantum mechanics and two slope questions.
Well, everybody seems like they might be tired of sitting, so shall we go ahead and take our break? Will you be available for
I
people
will
to
be,
talk with?
yes.
So let's have refreshments and something to drink and snacks, is that all right? Let's give Dr. Haisch a hand.
Yay!